In this video, I've got some cool photography tips I want to share with you, and because Christmas is just a few days away, hence the Christmas tree in the background, I thought I'd do a themed video, and I thought of doing maybe the 12 days of Christmas, share 12 photography tips with you, but when I started compiling the list, I ended up with way more. So get set, I've got 25 cool photography tips for you. Don't go away. Hi, Paul here from Photo Genius. Welcome to my channel where I like to share photography tutorials, tips, tricks, do occasional gear reviews. So if you're new, please consider subscribing. Now in this video, I've got 25 photography tips that I want to share. Now that's a lot and I don't want this video to be overly long. So let's get straight into it with tip number one, and that is when to use flash. Now I'm not a big flash user, to be honest, and I'm also using the camera generally in the manual modes or the semi-manual modes like shutter or aperture priority, where the flash doesn't pop up. But that doesn't mean you can't pop the flash up if you want it. Now when should you use it? Well, flash can be really useful when you want to fill in shadows, particularly if your subject is backlit. Let me show you an example. Now this is just a fun self-portrait of me and the dog, but because we're backlit, as you can see, we're in shadow. The background looks okay. Pop the flash up and the flash can fill in the shadows. This is a really good tip. Now the background, if you compare the two images, remains constant because it's not affected by the flash. Have you ever taken an image and thought to yourself, I don't know, I wish this picture was slightly brighter or maybe a little bit darker? Well, if so, tip number two is for you guys. This is called exposure compensation. This mode allows you to make your picture brighter or darker just at the press of a button. Now for this mode to work, you need to be in one of the priority modes, shutter or aperture priority, or program mode. So if you're new to cameras, maybe we'll start off with program mode, which is P on the dial. Now, if you put your camera into the P mode, look for a button with a plus minus symbol on it. On this Nikon, it's on the top. If you've got a Canon, it's usually on the back. Hold that down and turn the dial. And you will see on the screen on the back, a little marker appears and it will go either to the plus side if you dial to the right or the minus side if you dial to the left. This is exposure compensation. Plus for brighter, minus for darker. Take 3 photos. Put the camera in program mode. Take picture number 1. Then hold the button, dial to the right for a slightly brighter image, dial back to the left for an underexposed image. This is a really cool feature of the camera. I did a video on this actually where I go a little bit deeper into it. I'll put a link up here so you can check it out. But this is a great feature, exposure compensation. Tip number 3 is going to be really useful for those of you that might want to do landscape photography, or probably more importantly panoramas. Those are instances where you want your camera to be absolutely perfectly level, and you'll of course be using a tripod for this. Now for that reason, some tripods have spirit levels built into the top. Some cameras have it built in as well. This Nikon Z6 has it built in. The Canon 80D that I'm filming this video with has a spirit level built in. I think most of the Olympus cameras have it in. The Sonys do. So check your camera. But if you don't have a spirit level on your tripod, or you don't have a level built into the camera, then here's a trick that's really handy if you've got an iPhone. Open up your iPhone, go to your compass app, and there's a spirit level built into the middle. All you've got to do is line up the little 2 crosses. It's really easy. So if you've got your camera on a tripod, you pop the spirit level on the top and you adjust the tripod until the spirit level is spot on. Then your camera's level. Easy. Tip number 4, this is about stabilization. Now some cameras have image stabilization built in. For example, the Nikon Z series cameras have what is called IBIS, that's in-body image stabilization. Most Olympus cameras and Sony cameras have the stabilization built into the camera body, and alternatively with Canon cameras we have image stabilization built into some lenses, and with the Nikon cameras generally this is a lens feature, and it's usually called vibration reduction, or VR for short. So these are features that are designed to help you when you're doing handheld photography. The vibration reduction or the image stabilization is trying to counteract tiny hand movements that can cause blurry photos. It's a great feature, so this is generally something you want turned on, but you need to know when to turn it off. The moment you put your camera on a steady surface, so that's probably going to be a tripod, then you need to turn it off because it can work against you. I do a lot of photography workshops and we've done tests where we've taken a photo with a camera with the image stabilization turned off, sharp image. stabilisation turned on, slightly soft, blurry image. So very simple, turn stabilisation off when you're on a tripod, otherwise turn it on. Now this next tip may someday save all your camera gear from getting ruined. A couple of years ago I was doing a photography course here in Brisbane, got a bit grey in the afternoon and all of a sudden it absolutely poured. Now this wasn't a problem for me because I had a bag made by a company called Think Tank, like this one. And these bags come with a rain cover. It's one of the nice features of these bags. Now if your camera bag doesn't have a rain cover, I would suggest looking online and seeing if you could buy a rain cover, or at the very least find a plastic bag that is big enough to put over your camera bag. That way if it starts pouring with rain, you can pull out the bag, pop it over your camera bag and your gear is safe. And you can thank me later for this tip. Tip number 6 is all about lens hoods. Put simply, if you've got a lens hood, this is a lens hood, use it. If you haven't got one, consider buying one for your lens. So a lens hood is a piece of plastic that basically fits on the front of the lens when you're using it, and when you're not using it, it can go on backwards, and that way it takes up less space in your camera bag. Now what a lens hood will do is it will help to eliminate any lens flare from ruining your photos. It will help to make your picture a bit more contrasty, a bit more punchy looking, particularly in the dark areas. And as a bonus, it will also help to protect your lens from getting damaged. There's 3 things a lens hood can do. All good, there's no downside to it. So don't believe what people say about just using a lens hood when the sun shines. If you've got a lens hood, use it. If you haven't, consider buying one. This next tip is geared towards those of you that like shooting moving subjects. I'm thinking sports photography, I'm thinking wildlife photography. Consider buying a monopod. A tripod has 3 legs, a monopod is 1 leg, but what it does is it takes the weight of the camera, takes the vertical movement out, but allows me to pan the camera around and follow the moving subject. So if I'm shooting my boy playing soccer, this I'm using all the time. It's really, really useful. So tip number 7 is if you like shooting moving subjects, consider buying a monopod. Now my next tip is great for those of you that like using maybe Instagram. I'm a big Instagram fan. Sometimes I'm taking photos on my phone and uploading them to Instagram. Sometimes I'm using my bigger cameras and uploading my images to Instagram. Now, with some cameras you have an app and Wi-Fi or Bluetooth connectivity. That means you can send your images from your camera to your smartphone. But if you haven't got this feature, or you just can't be bothered with it, it's sometimes quicker just to use a card reader like this. All you got to do, very easy, pop the SD card out of the camera, pop it into the slot on the card reader, and then this can go straight into your phone or your iPad or whatever it is that you use. This particular one's for iPhones or iPads, but of course if you've got a different device, an Android device, you can buy one to fit your device too. This is just a time saver, so this sits in my camera bag pretty much all the time, and I'll put some links for these in the description below the video. That's tip number 8. My next tip is for you if you like doing maybe nighttime photography or maybe landscape photography. 2 instances where you're probably using a slow shutter speed and therefore your camera's on a tripod so it doesn't move. So you've gone to the trouble of setting up the tripod so your camera's steady, but then you press the shutter button and that means the camera may move, and that can cause blur. So you might invest in a remote like this one which works on the Canon camera. You may use Bluetooth or Wi-Fi to connect your phone to your camera if you've got that feature. It's a bit fancy. Some of the newer cameras have this, but look, here's a freebie that's built into every single camera. It's called your Selftimer. The Selftimer is a great way of eliminating shake because after you press the button there's a delay before the picture starts taking, and in that time your camera can settle down. So if you like doing nighttime photography, if you like doing landscape photography, find the Selftimer on your camera. It's usually pretty easy to find. Look for a button that has what looks like a little clock symbol next to it, usually found on the back of the camera or on the top of the camera. Selftimer is tip number 10. My next tip is to learn to control your focus points. Now this is something you can do when you're using the camera in the manual or priority modes. You cannot do this in auto. In auto, your camera's going to choose what to focus on. Of course, by the law of averages, it's going to focus on the correct subject sometimes, and sometimes it's going to get it wrong and you'll find that the subject is blurry, something else is sharp, and this can be incredibly annoying. So when I'm taking a picture, after I've got my composition correct, I move my focus point to my subject. It's really easy to do, and I've done a separate video on this, so you might want to check it out. I'll put a link up here and in the description below the video. But let me show you just how easy this is to do on a Canon camera. Look for this icon on the back of your camera, press the button underneath. You can now turn the dial on the top of the camera to select your focus points manually, avoiding auto selection. My next tip is about composition, and don't worry, you don't need to be artistic and you don't need to be using a big camera either. You can do this with your smartphone. Composition is a very simple way in which you can make your picture more engaging, more interesting to look at, and it's relatively simple. All you got to do is follow some guidelines or rules, such as the rule of thirds, probably the best known composition rule there is. The rule of thirds is about making your picture more engaging by taking your subject and instead of placing it in the middle of your frame, moving it off to the side. And you do this by breaking your image up into equal thirds, vertically and horizontally. Look where the lines intersect and place your subject where the lines intersect. I'm using the rule of thirds now in this video. The rule of thirds is a very simple composition rule that will help you raise the bar. So next time you're taking a picture, think about composition. It's amazing. Now, I love taking photos with cameras like this, but I also love taking photos with my smartphone. So if, like me, you like taking photos with your smartphone, this next tip is for you. But look, I'm an Apple user, so if you're an Android user, hopefully you can find this feature on your phone as well. Open up the camera app, tap to focus, and then slide your finger up and down the screen to adjust the exposure. This is a cool feature that a lot of people don't know even exists. You can also lock the exposure and lock the focus if you like, by holding your finger down, and this means that you can recompose and the focus and the exposure doesn't change. Tap to cancel, but really the main tip here is tap to focus and adjust the exposure. This is a cool feature on the Apple iPhones. My next tip is all about digital zoom. This is a really handy feature that can help you to nail your focus. It's very popular with people that photograph the night sky, the moon, the stars, the Milky Way, that kind of thing. And don't confuse this with your traditional zoom. So this is the lens. This I can zoom in and out, and this isn't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about digital zoom. Let me show you how it works. All you got to do if you're struggling to focus on a subject is flick the switch on the lens to M, which is manual focus, which means that you can now adjust the focus manually, not the zoom. This is the focus. Now, to make sure you're nailing the focus, go to the back of the camera, press the plus button, and you will see that your image enlarges. This is digital zoom. You can then adjust the focus and fine tune it, and when you've got it perfect, you zoom back out and take your picture. This is a cool feature. My next tip is about blur. Now, sometimes we try really hard to avoid blur. We want nice, sharp, in-focus subjects, but blur can actually be pretty cool. Why? Well, blur is a way in which you can show movement, maybe the direction something was moving in, or maybe you want to emphasize speed. Maybe you're photographing a waterfall and you might want to make the water go all nice and blurry and soft. That's a very popular look. So here's an experiment that you can try for yourselves. Put your camera into the shutter priority mode. Now, if you've got a Canon camera, this is TV. Most other cameras, this is S on the dial on the top of the camera. Once your camera's in this mode, you can turn the dial on the back or the top of the camera and adjust the shutter speed. Dial the shutter speed to the left, and you will be able to select a slow shutter speed, maybe 1/25 of a second, 1/10 of a second. Experiment, and you will see that you will now start to get blur. So if you're photographing something that's moving, it will blur. If you move the camera, everything will blur. Have some fun with this one. I wrote an article all about capturing motion in your photography. It features on my website. I'll put a link in the description below so you can read more. But here's the deal. Blur is not always a bad thing. Blur can actually be quite cool. For tip number 16, try the program mode. On the top of your camera, you've got a dial. There'll be a series of different letters or symbols, and one of them is P for program. Program is a great mode because it's similar to auto in that the camera will calculate the correct ISO, aperture and shutter speed for you. But unlike auto, you do get to make some changes, so you can be a bit more creative with it. So if you're not quite ready for full manual and you're a bit confused about some of the other camera modes, or you're new to taking photos with a camera like this, start off easy and use the program mode. Don't stress, program mode can be a lot of fun. Now, my next tip is all about Instagram. I love Instagram. It's not just a place where I can share my photos, but it's also a place where I can look at photos. I'm constantly inspired by the work of other photographers. So there's a bunch of people that I follow, and if I go to the home tab on Instagram, I can see their work. I love it, but there's so much more out there you might be missing. Go to the search tab and you get all these tiny thumbnails, and these are based on things that might be of interest to you. My tip is this, it's very simple. If I see an image that I like, All I've got to do is press and push up and I get a larger version of the image. And from here I can like or I can check the profile out. Really, really simple. And that's my Instagram tip. Tip number 18, if you want a blurry background, it's actually easier than you think. In photography, we call this a shallow depth of field, and there's 3 things you can do to try and achieve this look. Number 1, if you've got a zoom lens, zoom in a bit. The longer the lens is, the more shallow the depth of field. Number 2, if you can get closer, do it. The closer to your subject, the more shallow the depth of field and the more blur you'll get in the background. Don't get too close or your lens won't be able to focus. And number 3, this is probably the main one. If you know how to do it, open your aperture up wide. This is a low f number. If you don't know how to do this, here's how to do it. Put your camera into aperture priority mode, A or AV on the camera dial, and start turning the dial on the back or the top of the camera. You will be able to change the f number. Dial in the lower f number. The lower f number is the wider aperture, and that will help to give you a shallow depth of field. I've done a separate video on this one. You know where to find the link down below. Definitely check it out. Tip number 19, we're going back to composition. Now we talked about composition earlier with the rule of thirds. This is another composition tip, and this is all about changing your viewpoint. In other words, think about maybe dropping your camera down lower or bringing it up higher. If all you do is take photos from eye level, then your photo is going to look like everybody else's. A simple and very effective way of taking a picture, which is more engaging, is to take a photo from an unusual viewpoint. We don't see the world from down near the floor, but if you can take a photo looking down, maybe across some leaves or something, or across the top of a puddle and getting some cool reflections, this is a really easy and effective way of making your picture more engaging. Change your viewpoint. Change the way you see the world. Okay, so we've nearly reached the end of the video. Tip number 20 is all about ISO or ISO, depending on what you want to call it. This is a way in which you can control your exposure. There's 3 ways you can control how much light your camera records: aperture, shutter, ISO. ISO is the only one that really affects the picture in a bad way. The higher the ISO, the more grainy your picture will look. The correct term is digital noise. It's not ideal. It may also make your picture look a bit soft. Now, if you've got a Nikon camera, most, not all, but most Nikon cameras out of the factory have auto ISO set. So this is something you should probably turn off. So go into the menu, find auto ISO and turn it off. That way you can control it yourself. Default recommended ISO is, for me, 200. ISO, keep it low. Now, if you like getting up early for sunrise or you like taking photos at sunset, then tip number 21 is for you. Set your camera's white balance to cloudy, because in auto, your camera will be looking after the white balance itself, and this is all about colors, and it will tend to make that lovely orange color look a bit, not so vibrant, not so saturated. But if you set the white balance to cloudy, you should find you get better colors. So if you like sunsets, you like sunrises, find your white balance feature on your camera and set it to cloudy. Okay, tip number 22 is about lenses, and one lens in particular, the Nifty 50. If you don't know what the Nifty 50 is, this is a Canon 50mm f1.8 aperture lens. It's a prime lens. A prime lens is a lens that doesn't have a zoom, so you can't zoom in and out. Instead, use your feet and you'll walk closer to the subject or further away. Now, what it lacks in zoom, it makes up for in aperture. Aperture is really wide. This particular one, f1.8, but you can buy one that opens up to 1.4, 1.2. The lower the f number, the wider the aperture. What's the deal with aperture? Why should a wide aperture be great for me when I'm taking photos? 2 key things. The wider the aperture, the more light you can let inside the lens and inside the camera. So these are great in low light situations. Secondly, if you want to get a blurry background, you can achieve that better with a wider aperture. And at 1.8, this aperture is very wide. So blurry backgrounds are made easy with the Nifty 50. Now, I'll put some links in the description below so you can find out more about these. But if you're gonna buy one lens, the Nifty 50, a great value for money, is probably the one to buy. Right, let's talk about lightning. Taking photos of lightning can be tricky. People struggle with this one, and it's because they approach it in the wrong way. Good luck trying to press this shutter button at the moment the lightning strikes. It's not about fast shutter speeds, it's about slow shutter speeds. Learn how to slow your shutter down, 5, 10, 15 seconds, maybe even more. If you do, let's say, a 10-second exposure, and during that time there's no lightning, no worries. Do another 10-second exposure and another, and just keep going until you get it. If you're lucky during that 10 seconds, you might get 2 or 3 lightning strikes, and that's going to look amazing. So instead of trying to keep up with the lightning and use a fast shutter speed, you need to slow it down. And we approach taking photos of fireworks in a similar fashion as we do generally nighttime photography. Now, if you're not sure how this works, I've done a video about taking photos of fireworks. I'll put a link in the description below, and you can actually use the same technique for doing lightning strikes as well. So I hope you like that tip. Tip 24, let's talk about the viewfinder. Did you know you can adjust your viewfinder so that when you look through the back of the camera, you get a nice clear view? Look for a little dial that's tucked into the side of the rubber eyepiece. Turn this little dial and you can adjust the viewfinder. Technically it's called adjusting the diopter. You want to get a nice clear view when you look through here, so this is something I recommend doing all the time. Now if you wear glasses, try this without your glasses. There may well be enough adjustment here to fix the problem. Me, I wear glasses sometimes, but I don't want to wear glasses when taking pictures. So I've adjusted the viewfinder to compensate for that. It's a great tip. So wow, this has been a long video, and if you're still with us, thanks for sticking around. Tip number 25 is this: what takes a great photo is you, not so much the gear. As nice as it is to have a new camera, a nifty 50, a tripod, filters, those things aren't the most important. It's about you and the way in which you use the gear. I've proved in my videos here on YouTube that you can take an entry-level camera and take amazing photos, providing you know how to use it. So my tip is, get out of auto, explore the manual modes, make mistakes, have fun with your camera. Watch my videos. I've posted over 100 videos to YouTube now, covering all sorts of subjects, but they're all designed to help you get more from your camera. So I hope you're going to consider subscribing if you're not already subscribed to this channel. And remember, it's about you, not so much the gear. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please give us a thumbs up, consider subscribing to the channel, and don't forget you can leave questions and comments down below. I hope to see you again sometime soon. See ya. Bye.